The 1990s were a golden age for horror movies that flew under the radar. It's a decade filled with over-the-top villains, unsettling sci-fi, and low-budget gems. And the best part is, you can watch them all for free right now on Tubi. Welcome to the Cinema Cult. I'm your guide, CT, and today I've got 8 hidden gems and cult classics from the 90s that are just sitting on Tubi, waiting for you to watch them. And I got something for every kind of horror fan here, but I'm kicking things off with a movie that delivers some of the most radical practical effects of the decade, and a villain who grants wishes in the worst possible ways. I'm talking about Wishmaster. Wishmaster might be my favorite fun-to-watch horror movie of the 1990s. This one's directed by Robert Kurtzman, who puts the K in K&B effects, and this movie is an awesome example of that group's incredible practical effects work. The setup sees a powerful djinn trapped in a magical fire opal in ancient Persia, only to be freed by an unsuspecting auction house worker in the present. And once that djinn is loose, he starts granting wishes and twisting people's desires into the most horrible of punishments. And his goal here is to get the woman who freed him to make 3 wishes, which will unleash legions of djinn upon the earth. And this is one of the few movies where you want to see more of the bad guy in the rubber suit because it's so well done and this character looks genuinely menacing. And it definitely helps that the man under the makeup, Andrew Divoff, just plays a fantastic bad guy. And whether he's in human form or fully djinned out, Divoff chews up every scene he's in. And I think he might be the most charismatic horror movie villain of the time, outside of Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, of course. And speaking of Robert Englund, he's in this movie too as a rich antiquities collector, and that's just where the cameos start, and you'll see faces from franchises like Friday the 13th, Candyman, Evil Dead, and more popping up. And I love that this movie fully embraces its love of practical effects, and this story is bookended by 2 scenes that allow the special effects team to just get absolutely crazy. The opening scene in Persia basically drops the audience into what looks like an end-of-the-world event. There's guys getting Han Solo'd into walls, creatures coming out of people's stomachs, there's even a lady turning into a tree. It really sets the tone for how wild this movie is going to get going forward. Now, I've always felt like Wishmaster is a 90s movie that plays a lot like an 80s horror. The djinn is basically a supernatural slasher villain, and the way he twists wishes to punish his victims is just a blast to watch. So if you're looking for a movie that reminds you of how much fun horror can be, make sure you check out Wishmaster. Moving on from there, I've got a movie that's been described as the real world meets Saw by way of Suspiria. And that may be overselling it a bit, but this concept is too cool to ignore, and my next Tubi pick is called Kolobos. Kolobos is a low-budget horror movie from 1999 that aims high and never quite reaches the heights it's shooting for, but it's still a real solid watch, and I've always appreciated the ambition of this one. The setup has 5 young strangers participating in an experimental filmmaking project, staying at a remote house rigged with cameras everywhere. And they all have different motivations for signing up, whether they're seeking to quench their own curiosity or just looking for fame. Now, fans of slow burn horror will definitely appreciate Kolobos. You know bad things are going to happen to this group, but it doesn't really kick off until the back half of the film when Tina triggers a booby trap in the kitchen and gets sliced up with a couple of saw blades. This also puts the house into lockdown mode, sealing up all the doors and windows and leaving the remaining participants trapped like fish in a booby-trapped barrel. This movie is heavily inspired by MTV's The Real World, and it's a very early example of this reality TV concept being used as a setup for a horror movie. And I do think Kolobos could have leaned harder into that angle, but it's still a very cool foundation. There's also a bit of a meta moment in this one when the group sits down to watch a low-budget horror movie that stars the actress of the group.
The Slaughterhouse Factor Part 6. The final slaughter.
I really enjoyed the self-aware back and forth commentary.
What the hell are you talking about? This sucks.
And I usually see Kolobos described as a slasher, but for me this movie has a little bit more of a strange giallo feel than just a straight up slasher. You got the mysterious killer, shots of black leather gloves setting up the traps. Even the theme song is a blatant ripoff of Goblin's Suspiria theme. Kolobos is one of those films where I can see some people claiming it might be their favorite underrated gem of the late 90s, while others would probably hate and dismiss it. And you know what? I'd understand either take, but for me, I just love the effort here. You can tell these filmmakers have a great appreciation for the horror genre, and if you don't mind a film that takes a little while to get going, put Kolobos on your list. So moving on from that obscure low-budget effort, next up I've got a cult classic from an undisputed master of horror, finishing off his unofficial apocalypse trilogy. It's John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. In the Mouth of Madness is the final chapter of John Carpenter's unofficial Apocalypse trilogy, which also includes The Thing and Prince of Darkness. And just a few weeks ago, in my Cosmic Horror List video, I called Prince of Darkness the most underrated entry in that Apocalypse trilogy. Now this one, it might be the most Lovecraftian movie ever made that isn't actually based on a Lovecraft story. We've got Sam Neill anchoring this one, playing John Trent, an insurance fraud investigator who prides himself on being the kind of guy who's always one step ahead of everyone else. And he's hired to track down Sutter Kane, a Stephen King-like horror novelist so popular that his books are literally driving people insane. So Trent and his associate Linda travel to a town that shouldn't exist called Hobbs End, and the more these two dig into the case, the less things make sense.
This is not reality!
Reality is not what it used to be.
I absolutely love Sam Neill in this role, and the way this movie is structured makes you feel like you're on this journey into insanity with him. This guy is a skeptic who relies on logic to work his way through difficult situations, so when things in Hobbs End start getting creepy, you can really feel how frustrating and terrifying the situation's becoming. Things start out small, but before long, this entire town is possessed, and some of them are starting to mutate into creatures that look like they've come from another world. In the Mouth of Madness is not the kind of movie that's going to hold your hand, and some of what's presented here can't really be explained. But that's also the beauty of cosmic horror, and Trent's journey back from Hobbs End might be one of the most disorienting stretches in any Carpenter film. By the end of this thing, society's crumbling as Sutter Kane's work consumes it all. In the Mouth of Madness might be John Carpenter's most psychological film, and I consider it a must-watch for any horror fan, particularly if you dig cosmic horror. So make sure you take advantage and check this one out while it's free on Tubi. In the Mouth of Madness showed characters losing their minds to a book. My next movie, that's a much less serious look at what happens when a teenager loses his mind to a video game. This one's so 90s it hurts. It's called Brainscan. Released in 1994, Brainscan is one of those movies that's so thoroughly of its time, I felt like I was watching an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark made for grown-ups. Now, this movie stars Edward Furlong as Michael. He's a latchkey kid who got his knee messed up in a car accident that also killed his mom. And his dad's always away at work, so that leaves Michael home alone to watch horror movies and spy on his neighbor, and of course play video games on his tricked-out, voice-activated attic setup. And when he learns of a new game called Brainscan, he immediately calls the number, and without even having to place an order, the disc shows up at his door. That should have been a red flag, but he can't resist, and when Michael boots this game up, he's dropped into a first-person experience where he's tasked with committing a murder. And Michael's blown away by how realistic the experience was, till he finds a foot in his freezer and realizes this was no simulation. And that's when this movie gets really fun and introduces its villain, a cyberpunk demon called the Trickster, who lays it all out for Michael. Yeah, that's right, the murder was real, and not only that, there was a witness. So if Michael wants to live, he's gonna have to keep playing the game. And I have to give it up for T. Ryder Smith as the Trickster, because this character absolutely makes this movie. Smith is fully committed to this role. He's physical, theatrical, and clearly having a hell of a good time playing this bad guy. He really looks like someone who could have come out of a mid-90s video game magazine ad. And he also makes a great addition to this list lineup of charismatic horror villains right alongside Wishmaster's Jin. And this movie also has a killer soundtrack loaded with bands like White Zombie and Primus, which only adds to that mid-90s horror atmosphere. And Brainscan, Might not be a masterpiece, but between the trickster's scenery chewing and the heavy 90s nostalgia, it's an easy recommendation for anyone looking for a fun horror movie to watch on Tubi. And up next, I've got a 1990s take on a classic sci-fi horror story directed by a master of cult cinema. This one's called Body Snatchers. I'm genuinely surprised this version of the Body Snatchers story from 1993 doesn't get more love, because director Abel Ferrara delivers a tight, action-packed remake here with a screenplay co-written by Stuart Gordon and Larry Cohen. Now, for anyone who finds the original or the 1978 version a bit slow, this is the Body Snatchers movie you've been looking for. And this time around, the story follows a teenage girl named Marty, whose family are moving into a military base where her dad can run some tests for the EPA. And once they arrive, it's pretty clear to anyone watching this thing that these pod people have already begun infecting the population. And I really love the military base setting because it keeps things focused. Instead of pod people hiding anywhere in society, this feels like a more strategic, planned out invasion where the pods begin by taking over military bases and then move on to the rest of society. Now, that to me is a much scarier plan than the trying to invade society as a whole approach from earlier Body Snatcher movies. And if you like your Body Snatcher scenes extra disturbing, you'll definitely like this 90s version. These things take over the humans by invading their orifices with fleshy tentacles, literally draining the life out of their hosts and feeding it into a growing embryo. It's wild stuff. Meg Tilly, playing the stepmom, is absolutely incredible in this movie. She's even better in her role as a pod person than she is as a human. As the rest of the family's trying to escape, she delivers a spine-chilling monologue, and it's scary as hell.
Where are you gonna go? Where are you gonna run? Where are you gonna hide?
And of course, as a tribute to body snatching movies that have come before, I was glad to see they kept the iconic alien warning scream. It's always fun when a character you're not quite sure about reveals themselves to be a pod person when they point and start wailing that alien warning, calling the cavalry to convert the few remaining humans. So, if you've been dismissing this take on Body Snatchers, make sure you check out Body Snatchers from 1993. It's definitely worth your time. Now, sticking with classic horror franchises, next up, I've got an extremely underrated entry in what might be the most expansive franchise in horror, and this one comes from its Cursed Objects era. This one's called Amityville, 1992. It's About Time. There are dozens of Amityville movies, so I wouldn't blame anyone for just writing them all off. Many Amityville titles are cheap rip-offs, but there are some hidden gems as well, and Amityville 1992, It's About Time, well, that's one of them. This Amityville entry is the second of 4 films known as the Cursed Objects era of the franchise, and each of these films features a different haunted object from the original Amityville house, making its way into the world and bringing the curse with it. Now, this entry is about a cursed clock, and it might be the best of the bunch. And the setup sees this Amityville clock brought to California by an architect returning from a Long Island business trip. He thought it would look great on the mantle, but on the very first night, this clock opens up and makes itself a permanent fixture of the home. And from that moment, it's locked in on a mission to turn this house into the next Amityville. And it doesn't take long for strange things to start happening. When Dad goes out for a run, he's viciously attacked by a neighbor's dog. The attack itself was strange, but not nearly as weird as the black goo that starts seeping from his wounds. That goo eventually starts pouring out all sorts of things like faucets and mirrors. And basically, whenever you see that stuff, you know the clock is spreading its influence and something weird's gonna happen. And I really like that the metalhead son, who everyone thinks is a troublemaker, is actually the only one that has any clue about what's going on here. He's been figuring out this evil clock with the help of an elderly neighbor, but the clock doesn't like that one bit, and it takes some action of its own in the form of a renegade diaper delivery van. Now, that's just the beginning of this movie, going off the rails with effects that get increasingly goopier. So if you've been avoiding the later Amityville movies, you should give this one a shot. And if you dig it, well, you can move on to the rest of the Amityville Cursed Objects era, because they're all on Tubi right now. Moving on from the supernatural, Up next, I've got a claustrophobic Canadian sci-fi horror movie that punches way above its weight. This one's called Cube. Cube is a movie I stumbled across years ago and instantly fell in love with. This is low-budget filmmaking at its finest, with a terrifyingly simple concept that sees a group of strangers waking up inside a massive cube-shaped prison made up of thousands of identical rooms. Now, most of these rooms are safe, but some are rigged with booby traps that will kill in spectacular fashion. Now, with no memory of how they got there, these folks have to work together to solve the puzzle of the cube if they want to survive. Now, I love that this movie gives the audience a taste of how lethal these trapped rooms are right from the start. It opens on a character who never makes it to the group, instead stumbling into one of these trapped rooms where he's literally sliced into cubes by a grid of razor-sharp wire. Now, I've said before that I'm a huge fan of single-location horror, and Cube is as single-location as it gets. You never get to see the outside of the structure, and the audience is trapped in here with these characters for the entire runtime. That feeling of entrapment is a huge part of what makes this movie work. The trapped group is made up of an ex-convict, a doctor, a cop, a high schooler, and an office worker. None of them know each other, and they all claim to have no knowledge of why they're there. And you can't help but get pulled into this group's inability to fully trust each other, and then things get even more stressful when they run into an autistic man, and they get to hash out the ethics of abandoning someone to their death. Now, ultimately, this is a survival horror story that's not interested in getting bogged down in the details of what's going on outside the cube, or who, if anyone, is in control of this experiment. It's a pressure cooker situation where even rational decisions can backfire, and the puzzle is more complex than expected. This low-budget movie with humble beginnings went on to spawn a sequel, a prequel, and recently a Japanese remake, but the OG Cube movie is still my favorite, so if you're looking for a tightly crafted piece of sci-fi horror survival, check out Cube on Tubi. Moving on to my last film of the list, I'm going with a horror anthology that's got 3 very different tales of terror to tell, with one of my all-time favorite directors playing the part of the horror host. This one's called Body Bags. I knew I had to close this list out with a horror anthology because, let's face it, anthologies are about as quintessentially horror as it gets. And this one's hosted by John Carpenter himself in full horror host makeup, drinking formaldehyde, and rifling through corpses looking for a good story. Now, the first segment, it's called Gas Station. This one's directed by John Carpenter. It follows a college student named Anne working her first overnight shift at a gas station near Haddonfield, Illinois. Yeah, the same Haddonfield from the Halloween movies, and here we've got another serial killer who's broken out of a nearby mental institution. They really got to get better security at that place. Anyway, as the night goes on, things get more tense for Anne until eventually the killer reveals themselves and she's got to survive. It's a classic setup that works well as an opener for this anthology. John Carpenter also directed the second segment of this movie called Hair. Now, this one's just a blast. We got Stacy Keach playing a middle-aged guy who's seriously self-conscious about his thinning hair, so when he goes in for a miracle hair transplant procedure, he's amazed at the results. At least at first, because soon he's feeling like crap and he's got hair growing out of places it shouldn't be. And when he takes a look at these new follicles under a magnifying glass, he's shocked at what he finds. It's definitely a fun twist on the warnings of being too vain. The third segment of this anthology is called I, and it's directed by Toby Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame. It's even got Mark Hamill playing an aging minor league baseball player who's about to get called up to the majors when he gets in a terrible car accident that takes his right eye. Now, lucky for him, there's a new procedure that can give him a cadaver eye. Unlucky for him, that cadaver eye came from a serial killer recently put to death. So now he's having visions of what this killer did, and the spirit is trying to take him over completely. It's definitely the creepiest segment of this anthology, and a great story to close with. And just like the opener of this list, Wishmaster, Body Bags is absolutely loaded with cameos that eagle-eyed horror fans will absolutely love. And between those cameos and John Carpenter hamming it up as the host, this one's a real treat to watch, and you should definitely make some time for it while it's still free on Tubi. So there you have it, 8 90s horror flicks that you can stream for free in the US on Tubi right now. And if you had a good time checking out these 90s picks with me, well, make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons to join the cult. As far as Tubi goes, their library's massive and it's always changing. This is the first time I've done a Tubi specific list, so if you want to see more streaming specific lists, definitely let me know in the comments. This channel's still young, I'm trying to figure out what I could do more of, so I always appreciate the feedback. And if you've got an awesome 90s movie that I missed today, make sure you include that too. You can also check out some of my other favorite horror selections right here, but that's it for today. I'm CT Reese, thanks for hanging out with me and keep watching weird movies. I know I will.